Hi everybody, welcome to this lesson on the Zohar. This will be a series. We'll continue throughout the entire Zohar. And if you really want to find more information about Zohar, I suggest you Google it or search for it and find out about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and the history of Zohar. We're going to just dive right into it here. From Bereshit, the beginning of Torah. Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. That's the first verse. We're going to use the word Elokim as a replacement for Elohim, as a respect for God's names. There is no reference actually in Torah to God. God is an English word, a modern term. God has multiple names, and all of those names represent his different modes of function and action in the spiritual worlds and in the world in which we live. So that first verse translates, and we're going to read through the text. When God began to create, others say, in the beginning God created. Still others say, beginning created God. Heaven and earth, the earth being formed and void with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind, or the Spirit of God, sweeping over the water. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and he called the darkness night. And there was evening, and there was morning, a first day. The Hebrew says Yom Echad, others say one day. Now, you'll see many highlights on the screen, and I'm going to introduce you now to the meaning behind those highlights. There are three. On the left-hand side, you'll see a chart. God said, God made, God saw, and then just the word God. These colors relate to the colors highlighted here on the screen. And one can see, for example, here Elokim, and that relates to one of these lines, one of these diagonal lines. God said, Vayomer Elokim, and this is in the second verse, or the third verse, and there we can see the relationship to these yellow or gold spheres. And then Vayar Elokim, God saw, that relates to these vertical lines. And then we'll get a little further on to Vayas Elokim, and that relates to these horizontal lines. Now, the importance of these lines is such that they form a structure which is called the Sphirot, essentially representing the structure of all of creation, and in our own relationships, the structure of our souls and the way that our soul construct relates to our body. Now, there are 10 times God said in the opening verses of creation. There is 3 times God made in the opening verses, 7 times God saw, and the word God is written on 12 occasions. That adds up to 32 times. 32 is spelt in Hebrew because Hebrew has no numerical system. Its letters are its numbers. 32 represents lev, which means heart. So this is essentially the center of emotion. The heart is the center of emotion, and it's from that lowest point of our function, of God's function in the world, that emotion and action come into being through the heart. Now, we can do some further analysis on this initial opening text. So, for example, the Spirit of God sweeping over the water. Now, we see in the next sentence, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So this is an act of creation. God creates the light, and there's light. But there's no mention of the creation of water anywhere. We see water mentioned several times throughout this first section. And water water essentially represents wisdom, it represents Torah, and it flows from a high point down to a low point. Here we can see this relationship to wisdom, and in one of these 10 kalim or vessels. And these vessels are ultimately connected through these vertical and horizontal and diagonal lines, which essentially there are 22 of them, and they represent all of the Hebrew letters of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph Bet. So we can see here each of these letters. This is the mother line called Shin, Aleph, and Mem. These are the horizontal lines that connect the various attributes, characteristics of our souls, of our personalities, of our emotional and intellectual souls, emotions being here in the lower section and intellect being here in the upper section. There is a right side. You can see this chart is divided in two. There's a right side to this chart and there's a left side. On the one hand, all of these attributes represent expansive modes of our own personalities again, and also of God's higher spiritual realm, his different names, and of course there's a left side which is more of a constriction. So for example, wisdom is an expansive concept. There is a flash of insight, an idea that expands, but as that expands, one has to grasp it with understanding, and that is a constriction that really begins to grasp onto something in thought, and it starts to dissect it, analyze it, and bring it down until it passes through all the emotive attributes and eventually comes into the world of action, the establishment of that wisdom that was an initial point of insight. So we can see that light was created, and God saw that light was good, and then he separated the light from the darkness. Of course, it's very difficult to understand how light and dark can be intermingled to such a degree that they can coexist. We understand light in our human form as being light and daytime, and then dark nighttime, so to speak. But here in the spiritual realms, of course, light and darkness can coexist. Evil can commingle with light or with good. So we understand in the world in which we live that there is this commingling of evil and good, light and darkness. God called the light day, called the darkness night, and there was evening and there was morning, the first day. Now the first day here is actually written differently to all the other days. The grammar here is Yom Echad, one day, a day. The day is almost self-contained in that sense, and it's from that day that all other days emerged. We'll move on. God said, let there be an expanse in the middle of the water. So again, this is the water that we don't have any source of creation. Water existed. The basis for water existed everywhere in the universal realms. And God separated the water from water, and he made an expanse. And it separated the water which was below the expanse and the water was above the expanse. And so it was, God called the expanse sky. So he separated the higher waters and the lower waters. In between those waters was the sky, and there was evening and there was morning, a second day. So now you're moving from day and night to evening and morning. Of course, here evening precedes morning, and just so that you understand, according to Jewish practice and tradition, the next day begins in the nighttime. The day begins in the night. So when the sun sets from the previous day, it's the end of the previous day, and so begins the next day. God said, let the water below the sky be gathered into one area, that the dry land may appear, and it was so. God called the dry land earth, and he called the gathering of the waters seas. And God saw that this was good. And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, seed-bearing plants, fruits, trees, and every kind on earth that bear fruit with a seed in it. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, seed-bearing plants, and every kind, and trees of every kind, bearing fruit with a seed in it. And God saw this was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, a third day. We will leave it at that, and hopefully you'll be back for our second episode. Thank you.